I'm dedicating this show tonight to the world's most beloved grandfather. Sheikh Khaled became famous as he cradled the body of his little granddaughter Reem last year after she was murdered by the invading Israeli forces. With his beautiful smile, his distinctive headgear, he became known as an icon throughout the world. He smoothed her hair, he smoothed her clothes, he cuddled her and talked to her as if she was still there. This week, Israel murdered him too. Having earlier, as it happens, I now learn, having murdered his grandfather in turn. It's been one long family line of being murdered by Israel. For those who say all this began on October the 7th, you're either an idiot or a liar, although, of course, you might be both. The Palestinian people have suffered more than 75 years of all of this. There once was a country called Palestine, then there wasn't. There once were a people called Paddystillians who were scattered to the four corners of the earth, stateless, passportless, hated, pillar to post, hunted. It's a very dismal story. And it's the more dismal because my country, and if you're in the United States, afterwards your country, are absolutely centrally responsible for the Calvary, for the agony, for the Via Dolorosa that has been 75 years of Palestinian life and death and misery. You don't have to be religious to agree with me, I think, that we should hope that Sheikh Khaled, the grandfather, is reunited with Reem, the granddaughter, in paradise this evening. It was a close run thing, though. I was thinking of dedicating the show to Ireland. I've never been more proud of the Irish blood DNA in my veins than I have been this week. Israel, the most hated country in the world, has decided to pick a fight with Ireland, the most beloved country in the world. I mean that quite sincerely, folks. Is there a people anywhere in the entire world more universally reviled than the state of Israel, the apartheid colonial state of Israel that is presently committing the massacres in the Levant and is up to its neck in the Palestinian blood in Gaza, Jerusalem, and the West Bank, and indeed the wider diaspora? Is there any country? If there is, I'd like to know about it. Call me up and tell me. But my contention is there is no more hated country in the world than Israel. Is there a more beloved country in the world than Ireland? Again, I want to hear from you. Is there? Which country is more beloved than Ireland? And yet, this very week, Ireland closed its embassy in Dublin, as Israel closed its embassy in Dublin and launched the most vicious attack, calling the state itself anti-Semitic, calling the Irish people anti-Semitic, even though plenty of Irish Jews have been on every single protest over the last 15 months against the genocide in Gaza. The Irish people are in the vanguard, it's true, of seeking to change the terms of trade, changing the balance of force. There are other countries, Norway in particular, in a leading role. The Norwegian football team declared this week that they refuse to play Israel in a World Cup qualifying match in protest at the genocide. But Ireland, north and south, with few exceptions, is a country where Palestinian flags fly high. The Glasgow Celtic supporters that you've seen so many images of flying their Palestinian flags, whilst born in Scotland, are self-identifying Irish people like myself, people with Irish mothers like me, people with Irish grandparents. It's the Irish diaspora that's in the front of the Palestinian cause around the Western world. So articles began to appear in the Israeli media openly stating that the Irish hate the Jews, deliberately conflating the Zionist apartheid state of Israel with Jews, the very thing which would get you branded an anti-Semite and arrested if the rest of you tried it here. If any of us decided to blame any Jew in our country for the crimes of Netanyahu, we would rightly be criminalized. We would rightly be prosecuted for it. But when the boot is on the other foot, that's all right. So personally, they're now calling Ireland Paddystillians. Well, I'm proud at one remove to be a Paddystillian, and I take my hat off to the Irish President Higgins and to the Irish polity and to the great Irish people. If you've made the worst country in the world hate you more than any other country, you have done a signal service to the world. It's true that Ireland was one of the last countries in the world to recognize the state of Israel. It's true also that was under the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. It's true that the Roman Catholic Church was once not all that keen on Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. And that's partly because 20% of the Palestinian people back in the day were Christians. It's much less now. Most of them have been driven away out of the country. But in those days, the church felt a responsibility to defend the interests of Jesus' people in the Holy Land, after all, whose capital was Jerusalem, where Christ was crucified, one of whose most important little towns, Bethlehem, was the place where Jesus was born. Once upon a time, church leaders cared about that sort of thing. I was thinking about it all over again today when I attended a simply delightful performance by one of my children and her classmates singing Christmas carols and songs to old age pensioners in a local old people's home. Bethlehem, 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 they kept recounting in song after song. And I got to wondering why the hierarchy of the church never explains to anybody that Bethlehem is a Palestinian town that's under siege, under occupation, that blood runs now through the streets of Bethlehem. I wonder why Christian leaders never explain to their flock that Jesus was a Palestinian, that Jesus lived, walked, was tortured, and was killed in the streets of Palestine. Why don't they ever explain it? Because they are running scared of the kind of treatment that Ireland has received this week. But if you don't run, they can't chase you, you know. You have to stand up for what you believe in, or you don't actually believe in it at all. You're only wearing it on your sleeve for ulterior purposes. And it's about time that all these politicians that are never done telling us how Christian they are stood up for the Christians in the Holy Land. And ditto in Lebanon and in Syria, where tonight I can take you to photographs of the Greek Orthodox Church, of Catholic churches, of other Christian places of worship that are being systematically desecrated, wrecked, ruined, and their parishioners hunted down if they have not already escaped across the border to Lebanon. 90,000 Syrians crossed the border into Lebanon over the last couple of days. I'm willing to bet that most, but not all, of those were from Syria's multitude of religious and ethnic minorities. And when you see some of the random video that is now beginning to appear, the news stories that are being published, Christian couple where the husband was beheaded and the wife shot to death, Alawites, the minority sect to which the Assad family belonged, being harassed and beaten at gunpoint and threatened with death. It doesn't look yet that the new ISIS-Al-Qaeda government in Syria is necessarily behind this. If they were, the reign of terror would already be very much more bloody. But the truth is, the gates have been blown open and the barbarians have poured in. Uzbeks, Uyghur, Chinese, waiters from Cardiff, people from Albania, from Ukraine, Muslims from Chechnya, people from all over the Takfiri fanatic world. The world where any deviation from a tight current within a sect, within a religion, is punishable by mutilation and death. They have poured in. And the new Al-Qaeda ISIS government has told them all that because they liberated the country, they will be granted citizenship. So they'll have Syrian passports soon. Good luck getting through an airport with a Syrian passport easily anytime soon. Because these black hundreds of extremist fanatics are going to, believe me, be on their travels. They won't stay in Syria for long. Apart from anything else, it's a very poor place. No, these people will be off on their next mission. The Chinese Uyghur battalion, 5,000 strong, has already liberated the missiles and made off with them that they intend to use against China. The Chinese people and government may not wholly be aware of the threat that's coming their way, but they better wise up. Russia will be an obvious target for some of these extremists. The Central Asian republics will be others. Albania, also, very significant number of Albanian fanatics have been fighting and killing in Syria. There are many other countries in the east of Europe with reasons to be less than cheerful about the spilling out of heavily armed, trained, war-hardened, battle-hardened fighters from the Syrian jihad. But some of them might come to a Christmas market near you. Some of them might, I don't know, lurk on London Bridge. Some of them might pack their explosives into a backpack and take them to a concert and blow up your children. You better know all of this because your government is responsible for it. The Syrian refugees, I think 1 million of them, maybe 2 million of them, who left because they were political opponents of Assad, who wanted to see the overthrow of the Syrian regime, in a logical world would even now be rushing back home, but of course they are not. I'm going to predict to you that virtually none of these Syrian refugees that are in Western countries are going to return to live under ISIS and Al-Qaeda in poverty-stricken Syria. I'm going to bet you on that. So don't expect that having supported this war, you've supported the ending of the boats. The truth is, more rubber dinghies are headed your way. The people who are now fleeing Syria for fear of ISIS and Al-Qaeda are not going to stay in Lebanon. They're not going to stay in Turkey, which in any case probably is determined to return them to Syria. So they're coming near you. They'll be in a hotel near you soon. A hotelier will pick up £80 a night from your taxes, £80 a night, 7 nights a week for many, many years. So look forward to spending billions of your tax money on new Syrian refugees and continuing to pay whatever it is you are currently paying for the Syrian refugees that are already here. Nothing in life is cost-free, you see. Everything that you do in life has consequences, and every action has a reaction. it won't be long before there is armed opposition in Syria to the HTS, the Al-Qaeda, ISIS government there. How could it be otherwise? The religious and ethnic minorities are not going to allow themselves to be murdered one by one. They're not going to allow their churches to be destroyed one by one. They're not going to wait for the executioner's call. No. Eventually, elements of the army, elements of other armies will begin an armed struggle in Syria, and a new Syrian civil war will inevitably erupt, because the vast majority of Syrians have no intention of being ruled by a Taliban-type formation of extremist fanatics. Somebody criticized me the other day for making a comparison between Syria and Afghan to the detriment of the latter. Well, you don't know any Syrians if you don't know what I'm talking about. There are no Christian minorities in Afghanistan. Women don't sit in cafes drinking red wine with their husbands in Afghanistan. There is no freedom for women or for any dissenter in cultural, social, or political terms in Afghanistan. There are no communists in Afghanistan. The last time I looked, there were 11 communist MPs in the Syrian parliament, which presumably has now been dissolved. The comparison between Syria and Afghanistan is religious, apart from anything else. The type of Islam practiced in Syria is not the type of Islam practiced in Afghanistan. If you can't see this, you are a liberal idiot. If you think pointing that out is racism, you are a liberal idiot, bereft of any understanding of what the word racism means. Anyway, accusing me of racism is a very, very difficult thing to do. Being the father of 5 mixed-race children, being the husband of an Indonesian woman, and having represented more people of colour and of different cultures in the British Parliament over nearly 40 years than anybody in the history of the state, calling me a racist is really not going to stick. Yes, I mean you, Mr. Bastani. The truth is, the story isn't over in Syria. The struggle will continue. But there's nothing to celebrate. Whatever you thought of the regime of Bashar al-Assad, there's nothing to celebrate. Israel now occupies 1/3 of the country. 1/3! Israel occupies 1/3 of Syrian land. The US and Turkey occupy the other third of Syrian land. And the Turks are massacring the Kurds, although the Kurds, as you could expect, are putting up quite a fight and refusing to go quietly into that good night. That only leaves 1/3 of Syria, and boy, is that going to be fought over. I've only got time to make passing reference, though it will come up, of course, in the show, to the act of terrorism that took place in Moscow this week when General Kurillov was blown up along with his adjutant as he came out of an apartment block in which he lived to get into his ministerial car at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's the time they start work in Moscow. He was cruelly murdered, yes, of course, but he was a general in the army and he had been publicly threatened. It probably didn't come as all that much of a surprise. And there are very big questions to be asked about why a general is living in an apartment block in the middle of a war. There are questions to be asked about why a general is being picked up by a single driver instead of a whole posse of FSB agents securing the perimeter to allow him to come out into his car. It is another major security fuck-up by the Russians, of these things, there is absolutely no doubt. But it also puts very serious pressure on President Vladimir Putin. If there was an end-of-year award for forbearance, for perseverance, and for biding one's time, Putin would definitely win it. But there's a huge rising demand in Russia for this war in Ukraine to be finished. And that will require taking the gloves off. The last time I looked, Vladimir Putin had begun taking his gloves off. Much more of this coming up. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.